So I've traveled around a bit. This is my 9th year at Gonzaga. I was hired at Gonzaga to teach political theology, but it was kind of a ruse in the sense that what I actually did was, in my own work, was study a figure named Friedrich Schleiermacher. Not a household name. It'd be impressive if you knew who this was, but a German thinker turned in the 19th century. But it became clear to me in the interview at Gonzaga that they weren't looking for someone who's going to teach a course on this particular German thinker, and instead we're much more interested in things like political theology, which actually mapped up really well with what I had been working on. In the time I've been at Gonzaga, I've taught on a number of courses that deal with kind of the intersection of modern Christian thought and modern political thought. And in the last few years, Christian nationalism, in one way or another, has really come to the forefront of that. And so that's been showing up in a lot of courses. My wife and I have 3 children. They are ages 9, 7, and 5. Our middle child just turned 7 yesterday. They are a wonderfully intense set of children, so they take up a good amount of time. Our youngest has some significant physical and intellectual disabilities as well, and so he's on a slightly different path. We generally attend a Catholic church. My wife is Catholic. My own background is Protestant. I grew up in a Lutheran church, and then spent most of my formative years in Christian Reformed circles. So I went to Calvin College, which is now Calvin University, and was kind of steeped in the Reformed tradition in that sense. And so, in many ways, this feels very welcome and at home in this respect. And one of the things I noticed in your sermon was that I appreciate things about the Catholic Church. There's a significant gap between the preparation that goes into a sermon in the Protestant context and the Catholic context. Glad to see that will be on tape.
Did you participate in the annual Calvin series, the January series ever?
So when I was there, I was a student. I was there, but studying it.
That's great. I'm just looked at.
It is, yeah.
If you listen, it's wonderful. Really enlightens you.
Yeah.
Think about things you never thought about.
That's right. Yeah, and I think at Calvin, I don't know how much that's changed, partly because of the things we're talking about here. But at the time that I was at Calvin College, which is, I graduated in 2001 from college. There's a really strong emphasis on questions and cultivating this intellectual approach to faith and incorporating that faith. I think that's still there, but yeah. Yeah, I want to start off quickly by asking us to go around, and I won't get all your names, but I'll try to at least pick up some. Say your name, and then I'd be interested to hear how long you've been in Spokane. 1 year, whole life. We'll start here, just to catch you off guard.
My name is Tim. I've been here 40 years.
Kay, and I moved here in 1980.
Pam, and I've been here probably 60 years.
Okay.
Dixie, and this is where I live. Born and raised.
I'm Brad. We moved here in 1969, so I've been here off and on for 20 years.
Marina Sargent, mother of Brad.
John Tucker. And we come together.
Yeah.
And we've been here 26 years.
Mary Marsh, in deference to those of us with hearing loss, please speak up.
I'm Sarah, and I've been here, I don't know, 20 years, I think.
I'm Judith, and I've been here since 93, 30 years, a little over.
I'm Barter, and I've been here my whole life.
Been here my whole life.
I'm Kathleen, I grew up in Coeur d'Alene, but we moved to Spokane.
Brian, I've been here 30 years.
I'm Jill Whitaker. I go to Monroe.
Yeah.
We've been here 8 years.
My name is Deanne, probably 40 years.
Hi, Gloria Hoskins. I was here 28 years, left for 25 years for California, and came back in 2008, so that's 16 years. So 28 plus 16.
Okay.
I'm Nancy, we've been here
40 years, although I was born here. It's the generation.
Joe Curry, I've been here 36 years.
Lisa Gray.
I'm Carl, I've been here 10 years.
Okay.
I go with him, I own, and we only lived 25 miles away before we moved to Kansas.
Okay.
We were on a farm.
Fair enough.
Sally Greener, I've been here 32 years. I'm Joanne, I've been here 44.
Janet, I've been here 40 years.
I'm Julie, and I've been here 41 years.
I'm Claudia, and I've been here 40 years.
Okay. What about the back?
I'm Jack Harper. I guess I'm the newbie. I've been here 3 years.
I'm Jim, I've been here 14 hours.
Okay. Well, this is good. I was starting to.
He drove in to church. Visiting for a few minutes.
I'm Penny, and I've been in Washington for 9 years.
I'm Selena. I went to college at Woodward for 5 years, and then I went back to California. And, I fallen in love with this guy named Bill. So now, since then, I've been here 45 years, so a total of 50. I'm Gladys, and I've been here around 50 years.
I'm the Bill. I'm 63 years.
Barry, we've been back here for 43 years.
And I'm Karen, I'm Bill.
Great. Well, it's nice to meet you all. I hope to get to know you. I'm sorry, please.
I'm Josh. How did we?
What's newbie mean?
I just joined the church about a year ago.
Okay. Well, I'm listening. Fair enough. Welcome. I feel like a newbie then, having only been in Spokane for 9 years. It was starting to feel like a long time, but this is good to know. Good. I prepared a handout that I'll pass around, and I'll confess that I probably don't have enough of these. I think I have 20. But if you would, maybe share with some. Oh, sure.
2 seconds.
Thank you, Jen.
Yeah, thank you. All right, well, I will pass these down. What this is a shortened version of a report from the Pew Research Center that was published in 2022. So the Pew Research Center ran a survey on Christian nationalism and specifically how Americans understand Christian nationalism. So what you see here is mainly the information there. Like you'll see my own kind of condensed summary of this. It's two-sided. So on the first page, you'll see the snapshot of what they learned from that survey. One of the things that's surprising about that is that being asked the question, how much have you heard or read about Christian nationalism? 54% of the respondents said nothing at all. It wasn't something that they were really aware of. It wasn't a term that they were familiar with or had heard. And then the others primarily responded that they heard at least a little, ranging from a great deal or quite a bit to some to just a little. Among those who had heard it, they asked if they had a favorable or unfavorable view, and there was a fair range of responses. So not that many people actually were familiar with the term or the language, ultimately. And a variety of different responses of what they thought it meant and whether they had a favorable or unfavorable view towards it. So that's surprising. And then in addition to that, they asked respondents to give their own take on it, or to put in their own words what Christian nationalism means to them. And I pasted on the back side of this sheet here a kind of snapshot of some of the range of those different responses. There's nothing scientific about this, I'll say. I didn't have any particular method for which things I included or didn't, except that they tended to stand out to me. I tried to capture what I felt was the range of responses here. Those that were both favorable and unfavorable to the term, those that saw themselves described in the term, and those that resisted that. What I would invite you to do then, after you have a copy of this, is take a few minutes just to read through these on the back side of this. And I'm interested to hear from you what stands out, first of all, and which of these seems to you to be something that captures your own understanding of the term. Which of these stand out and which captures your understanding. And if you'd like, any that stand out for other reasons, that stand out as being an understanding of this that you very much disagree with, perhaps, or that is notable and worth mentioning and worth pushing back against. But take a few minutes, read these through, and then we'll talk about these all together. All right, expect some are still reading, which is fine. I'm hearing some responses, hearing some sighs. Yeah. What stands out? Positively negative, please.
It's made up by the left of Christian Nationalism, so I like it.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, I just recently read the book, The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory by but it's all about this subject. And it's the first exposure I'd had. I borrowed the book from my own, and I was appalled, let me put it that way. I see it as a worship of the government, the country, and has very little to do with Christ.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. This is a book I've heard of and not read myself, but have been following. So Tim Alberta, I think, sounds right.
Yes, yes, it'll make the hair on the top of your head stand up straight.
That's what I understand. And he's talking about it from his own experience, in particular within evangelicalism, I think, right?
Yes.
And seeing the kind of cauldron of rage that's beneath the surface that seems to be captured by Christian Nationalism today. Yeah.
My book was just returned to me today, so if anybody wants to borrow it.
What was the name?
Pardon me?
What was the name again?
Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, other things that stand out, other reactions here. So that's one stood out to me as well, that this is a term that's made up by the left, but kind of embracing it otherwise, that, well, I'm a Christian and I'm patriotic, so I'll take it, and it makes liberals mad, so so much the better. Other responses, other things that stand out.
Well, it's a wide variety.
It is.
It means to be Christ-like compared to it's made up by the left and it makes liberals mad. And so yeah, it's a huge variety of thoughts on it, and they don't come anywhere close to being the same.
That's right. That's one of the things that stands out. I think one of the surprising aspects of this overall is just the lack of a sense that when these words are spoken, that people hear the same things.
It's promoting white supremacy.
I like that it seems more like a couple. Because it has nothing to do with Christianity. It's a group of people trying to push an agenda.
Yeah.
And it's not a very positively good agenda.
Right.
It's very self-serving.
But a lot of, also cult-like perhaps in the amount of emotion and the amount of fervor that it attracts or brings together.
Which hate and rage is the
Yeah.
majority of the emotion.
Yeah.
Not real positive.
from some things I've studied about the Soviet Union and Germany in the 30s, a cult ends up as a closed system, so it has people who are insiders and people who are outsiders. And it uses code words. And so part of what I've seen in terms of Christian nationalism is a movement towards using the term influencing culture, but it really, when you look underneath it, it's about control and making a closed system that benefits some and excludes others.
Yeah, good. I hope that next week, actually, to talk a little bit more about Germany in the 1930s and the specific kind of Christian nationalism that was a part of the rise of the Nazi movement, the National Socialist movement, which is an important thing to talk about. Christian nationalism is here today, but there have other instances of it. We find other instances of it also today outside our own context. But historically, there are some important markers to note when it comes to Christian nationalism. In that context, though, it was meant to support and kind of safeguard this understanding of the national racial community that was a part of the Nazi mindset, who was inside and who was outside. And Christian faith or Christian belonging was one of the markers that would guard that, or kind of police the boundaries, so to speak. Not entirely perhaps the same as ours, but some disturbing parallels. And maybe it is more adjacent, we'd like to say. Someone had mentioned white supremacy, I think, in this corner. That shows up on a lot of these, right? Is it part of it? Is it something different?
The excessive pride in white Christian identity, that's kind of, we're no better. Yeah, so I think it does.
Yeah, there's at least an overlap or a kind of slippage between Christian nationalism and white nationalism. Some people talk about white Christian nationalism. It seems that these identities are supporting one another, or that the groups that see themselves in one also see themselves in another.
Well, from reading the book, there's this overwhelming sort of resurgence of the other. I mean, be it blacks, be it whoever in terms of another ethnic group, plus our LGBTQ people, anybody that's different. There's this rage that these people are getting a say instead of, what our democracy believes in is everybody gets a say. May not get very much of a say, but we all get a say. And that is angering a lot of people who want to be it.
Right.
They want to be the same.
And so anger that a particular identity is being threatened or eroded in some sense, and identifying that in some way with Christianity, but in many respects it maybe has more to do with white nationalism.
Yes, and I think there's a great deal of fear behind all of that.
Yeah.
They're afraid of anybody who's different, and that they might get control or more power or whatever, and tell us how to do things.
Yeah. Please.
My apartment complex, we have a mix of people discussing things, and we were discussing Jesus, what color he might have been, and this fellow came up and he said, "Can't God make Jesus white?"
What did you say?
We all pounced on him.
May I speak up, please, sir?
Yeah, please.
I also think there's you talked a bit about how this isn't like this new thing with nationalism, but I think there's a historical aspect too, and a maybe twisting, dare I say, of U.S. history that's part of this.
Yeah.
That we see in agreeing that this country was established with Christian beliefs at its core.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't know how historically accurate that is. But I think that's part of, it's like we've got to get back to our identity, which is a Christian nation.
Right.
Like, this is who we've been since the beginning.
Yeah.
Which is not true.
Yeah.
Right, so conflating these and a kind of creative retelling of our own history.
No, I just wanted to say that it's not true. I mean, many of the people who signed the Constitution and wrote the Declaration of Independence professed to be Christians. But let me tell you, they weren't practicing Christians. It was a time when that was a label that you used to lift yourself up, to make you look respectable, and that sort of thing. But there were very few that actually went to church every Sunday and professed the beliefs and that sort of thing. It was more of a facade.
Yeah, we're keeping a kind of confessional Christian identity very much at arm's length.
Yes.
Not that form structures.
Historically, from our understandings, that comes from a deep-seated clannish behavior that goes back to Old England and came over and it's perpetuated. And that was still going on. The Declaration was written, the Constitution was written, still today.
Clannish behavior in the sense of a sort of tribal identity where we're speaking with a particular group.
And also a fear of outsiders. And there was actually a good reason for that. Cattle stealing, rustling, crossing borders, family against family, this old feuding.
Yeah, but providing language that kind of justifies it or lifts up that fear and validates it in some sense. Yeah, please.
I think, Phil, as we're discussing this, and what comes to mind for me is that the whole reason of the establishment of this country, yes, we are, white American, the WASPs, but we've gone beyond that in many respects. And the reason this country, people came here and was founded was religious freedom, not religious, you shall do this. It was freedom, the pilgrims came over for freedom. They came over to be able to worship and hold a church that they wanted to.
I love all of this, but my big concern, and why I'm talking about this as a church, is because of the damage that this rise of Christian nationalism is doing to the church. That concerning our country too, but now, I think the general population is conflating Christian nationalism with Christianity. I just moved to a new neighborhood, and as I'm meeting my neighbors, I basically have to work into the conversation that I'm not a Christian nationalist.
Yeah.
I'm not weird, and I'm not, it's a big deal, especially in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
I think churches like ours are really a minority in Eastern Washington and Idaho. So it's really alarming.
Yeah, and I appreciate the way that this community has also framed the conversation. I'm glad to see Christian nationalism as idolatry is the way it was described, or the idolatry of Christian nationalism. Which is the way I see this as well, but I think you're right that this is not the dominant view. In my classes at Gonzaga University, classes that are on religion and often on Christianity, it's becoming more and more the case that students conflate Christianity with a kind of Christian nationalism. And so whatever feelings they evoke to them, for some it's something that they want to align with. For most, it's something that they very much want to push back against.
Yeah, so it's just keeping people away from church.
Yeah. There are some other
Those of us that have been here a long time probably remember the Aryan nations. And I lived in Moscow, Idaho when some of that was happening, and I found Aryan nations literature on my front lawn. And so I read some of it, and it was clearly anti-Semitic and racist, but also there were people in northern Idaho that I had in my church I went to, who were kind of this kidness identity, British Israelism, where the so-called lost tribe of Israel actually ended up in England. Therefore, the church and Israel really are one, and they're white English. So, I mean, there's stuff around us in Spokane for at least the last 50 years. And what is more diluted, seems like a more diluted form. We reacted against Aryan nations 50 years ago, but now we have a diluted form that is everywhere.
Yeah, so Aryan nations dissolved. People didn't go away. Didn't go away. And so new groups have formed. One of the things about these Christian identity groups in the Pacific Northwest is that they're very the particular movements are short-lived. They'll go for a while under a particular name, run into one another legal issue, or for one other reason they'll shut down, or they'll kind of move, and they'll reform as something else, somewhere else. But they're still here. I think probably right now, within 30 miles, there are meetings taking place, very much with this kind of view, meetings, church services.
Can we get your definition, what you mean by Christian nationalism? Because I came in here thinking something else. So it'd be interesting to say, okay, what do you mean when we're discussing?
We can, yes. But first I want to ask one other question, which has to do with whether or not nationalism is a bad word. But the question I want to ask is, what is a nation, as opposed to, say, a state or a country? What is it that makes a nation a nation?
I agree.
Partially geography.
Partially geography, okay.
Form of government.
Form of governments. It plays into it, and the kind of styles and ideals for this. But so abstracting from our context, if you think of England, France, Germany, what is it beyond government and beyond geography? What is it that makes England different from France, and France different from Germany? All these
Pride and history.
History, okay.
Your language.
Language is a really big part of this, okay. The word nation is a relatively new word historically. It's a word that we find instances of going back to the early modern period, and so you find it showing up in the 14th century, 15th century. People will talk about nationalism. But in the way that we use it today, it was a word that really coalesced or came together, or the understanding of the word came together around the time of the French Revolution. And it had a lot to do with culture, but really a lot to do also with language. Language came to be the kind of defining thing that would separate one nation from another, one group from another. And at the time that developed, it was also something that was developed in distinction against and over against the idea of the state. Not that many people historically get really excited about the state. But people get really excited about the nation, the particular group that I belong to, that this is my language, this is my tradition, this is my culture, this is who I am in a sense. That nationalism is something that is a feature of modern living, and something that becomes an important identity marker in a way. But I bring this up because in an important sense, there's a problem that starts to come up in modern Christianity that wasn't entirely there earlier, which is the problem of how you relate Christian faith to a particular national identity, over against the kinds of identities that would have been there at earlier times. Being a member of the Greco-Roman world, maybe being a Roman citizen, or being a citizen of some other locality. There's something about the identity of a nation or nationalism that's different. It brings in a kind of emotional aspect, a sense of belonging that's not just accidental, it's something that's connected to the core of the person, or this is at least the way that it's portrayed. It seems to me. But welcome your thoughts on this. But nation, in that sense, is a relatively modern word. In German, the German word that's used in place of nation is often Volk, so the people. But it's a similar idea, the people. What is it that makes the people the people? What separates this group that is us from everyone else, or this group that someone sees themselves as belonging to from everyone that is outside of that. The state polices this in different ways. So the state has laws, you set up boundaries and so forth. But even beyond that, there's some sense of a deeper connection to a particular group, it seems to me. But, welcome thoughts, please.
But we are a mix.
Right. So this is the problem in a sense, right? That there aren't really pure nations in that way.
Or people.
Or people, right. So languages help create this sense of stability, or this sense of quote-unquote organic boundaries in that sense. But language is also a mixture, constantly evolving, and borrowing terms from other languages and developing along with languages. This is something that I think becomes a feature of modern identity in a way that it wasn't earlier, or in an earlier stage. So this, I think, is an important ingredient of thinking about what's involved with nationalism. Let me ask them more broadly before we switch gears, and I'll put a PowerPoint in the background here in a moment. Is it a bad word? So is it a synonym with patriotism? Some of the responses here, and some of the things that I've heard more as part of the national conversation are, well, I'm a Christian and I'm patriotic, I love my nation, so sure, I'm a Christian nationalist. What's wrong with that? Is it a synonym with patriotism, or is it something different? Is nationalist a bad word?
Inherently, I don't think it is, but patriotism and nationalism are two different things.
Okay, good. What's the difference?
Well, one is about how you feel about your country and government, and the other one is about how you, like you were just saying, about how you feel about the greater group. You know, am I identified to this group or this group or this group kind of thing? Ethnically.
Okay, right. So language is fine, right? There's nothing objectionable about language, and we kind of celebrate the differences of language. Language, though, in that way, even in the way it started to function in the modern period, kind of became a code for ethnic belonging or for race. The idea of nation that we have, the modern idea of nation, developed about the same time as the modern idea of race, and these overlapped a lot.
And don't you think the emergence of the Nazi Party made nationalism kind of a dirty word or negative thought, or that's what sometimes people align nationalism with Nazi?
I think so, yeah.
Even though, I mean, I don't personally, basically, but just having this conversation, I'm going, okay, these are where these folks' respondents were coming from.
Yeah, I think that's right. So in the German context, nationalism wasn't a bad word until the Nazis. But afterwards, no one wants that association.
And the U.S. did not get involved in that. They were hands-off in that aspect too. So that maybe adds a little bit to our challenge.
Yeah. Please.
I have trouble with the definition of patriotism because people will say, well, I'm a patriot, and it seems like that means that you should be doing something. And what have you done to be a patriot? I don't understand how you call yourself a patriot, and that's all you do is call yourself a patriot. It just seems like it's an action.
Yeah, but there's a sort of call to action that's a part of it, right? Or when someone identifies themselves as a patriot, well, it can mean a variety of things. It seems to me that oftentimes now, when someone holds really tightly to that identity of being a patriot, there's a kind of willingness to want to act in a particular way to...
But you can see a lot of the people that call themselves patriots, to me, are not even worthy of saying the word patriot.
Yeah.
And it seems like you should be more active in your patriotism. You know?
Right.
I mean, were you in the service? Did you go and help your, and no, there's sitting home watching TV, drinking their beer, and calling themselves, I'm a patriot. Like putting those magnets on the back of the car that says we support our troops. What are you doing?
Yeah, how do you
To support your troops? I mean, you should be, just saying it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. But wanting to protect that identity, or feeling you need to try to protect that identity.
Yeah. So since I can't compare it to nationalism because I'm not sure exactly what a patriot is.
Well, the thing that's really confusing with the term is, like the Patriot Front is an example. There's a lot of violence associated with that word. Or they associate control and violence. I'm a patriot, I can do this, I can do that. They reject lawfulness and encourage lawlessness. And that's an issue.
Yeah, please.
I think of patriotism as a love for the entire area or nation or our country, but nationalism is a much more of an us versus them.
That's right.
Yeah, insular.
Yeah, and wanting to really control that boundary line. Please.
I think you can also, going back to the recent Olympics, absolute nationalism throughout, yet what a cohesive group to show how it could be, in the very best ways. I mean, you would have nation, one would win, one would lose, one would fall down. Another participant would pick them up and go life. And yet in a competitive setting, which is amazing. I thought it was great. I really did. Of how people can get along, could get along, and should get along. It's not negative, that nationalism. It really is.
And the Olympics are interesting there in that there's a kind of celebration of local national pride, so to speak.
Yeah,
absolutely.
absolutely.
But also the sense of communal belonging, or that we're part of some larger family, that we're cooperative in this. And that's stepping away from what nationalism often is, I think, where it's not just a pride in one's nation or a kind of love for one's culture or tradition or history, but this sense that belonging takes precedence over all other kinds of loyalties, or there's something about that supersedes all other values in one's life. It becomes the kind of central organizing factor. This is something that's uniquely modern, it seems to me. A kind of allegiance to one's national group that is part of the fabric of modern society that didn't exist prior. And one of the things that bothers me and makes this something that I return to in my own courses that I teach in my own scholarship is that I don't know that there are great answers to this within Christian communities of how to respond to this. I don't know that the problem has been met or faced up to. And so I'm interested to see ways to do so. Please.
This we versus them and, belonging, it seems to me that our country is more diversified than ever. There are more interracial marriages. There are acceptance of LGBTQ. And there's a lot of diversification. And yet, maybe this, the white Christian nationalism is a reaction to that, maybe? I don't know.
I think so. A sense of feeling threatened.
But I do think that we're much more mixed up than we used to be, even when we were kids.
Yeah.
Especially
mixed up meaning.
Well, I know what I'm talking about, especially Spokane, there's limited, even though there is diversity. When I moved to California, I have this group of women that I've been friends with for 40 years, and my sister said, how did you meet up with these people that, And, I work with them, and you don't have that here, that you have all sorts of people that you work with.
Yeah, but even in our families, lots of us have mixed races in our families now.
Yeah.
Right, and so if one's understanding of who they are or one's own identity has a lot to do with a particular kind of nationalism, that's also supported by an understanding of racial identity, then that is a threat. And that gets conflated also with Christian faith or loyalties that are present in the Christian context. Please.
Well, that's what confuses me about these folks that are so adamant about this, and they call themselves Christians. When, as far as I've learned when I was a kid this high, that Jesus loved everybody, and that's our job, and to accept everybody, and that sort of thing. And yet, this elitism or this exclusion of people that aren't like me. I mean, you'd think that if they were raised in the church, that would not have been the message.
Yeah.
And that's what confuses me about this, after reading that book too. They're just, they call themselves Christians and they're followers of Jesus and they're all this and that. And yet they're not. They're not.
Right.
Well, we're talking about nationalism and patriotism and Christianity. It's like these terms have all been hijacked. And that's what I feel. It's like they're stealing these terms and turning them ugly. And so it's like, what do we do about that? How do we get those back? How do we get back to what those terms actually meant? So it frustrates me. I get a little.
You could be a nationalist in the United States, right? Because that leaves out a lot of people that can't be nationalists.
Right. That are also citizens of the United States.
Right. So.
Yeah, it's a dichotomy, just like you were saying.
Let's look at the statistics And it's interesting that number 5 comes up twice. The 5 that are a big deal. There's only 5 that are favorable, both 5. The rest is kind of like whatever.
Wishy-washy.
And what I've read and experienced is the silent majority of Americans, if you haven't heard about Christian nationalism, they don't care. It's like, whatever.
I think that's right. So I think for many people, they haven't heard the term or they don't accept it necessarily as a label, or maybe now that it's becoming more streamed. It'd be interesting to see this survey done even 2 years later and what the difference would be. My sense would be that more people would recognize the term or will have heard some about it. But it seems to be embraced more and more, I think. And that's it.
But that's the media too. And they're using the media to expound their point of view, push it. That's propaganda.
Yeah, we're kind of bombarded by these messages constantly, and we're often now separated, I think, into more comfortable centers in terms of what kind of media we consume and what we're supported by, and wanting to receive the messages that we find comforting or that reinforce things we already believe. It becomes a problem. I want to slip into professor mode here in the last few minutes, if you'll allow me to do that, and go through some slides. Before doing so, though, I mentioned that nationalism and nation, these are modern concepts. There's a time around the beginning of the 19th century, fascinatingly, in which a number of really important modern concepts come onto the scene about the same time. So nation is one of those, race is one of those, religion, in the way that we use that word today, is one of those. It's not as if these things didn't exist prior to that, but our modern understanding really came into being at that time. Some others, though, they're really important. Progress. We almost all, I think of the world in terms of progress, as progressing towards history is going somewhere. This really wasn't an idea that people shared prior to the 18th century, the 19th century. This was not really a part of early Christian communities. They wouldn't talk about the world progressing in that sense. There's a figure named Ernst Bloch who talks about the forward look replacing the upward look. We're no longer looking to heaven, but we're looking forward. We want to see the validation of our lives in the future, securing a certain kind of future. One last one, revolution. The word revolution, in the political sense, was a kind of creation of the 18th century, the 19th century. Prior to that, it just meant what a wheel does. Going around. It doesn't make any change. It's a kind of strange thing that we use this word for massive change, right? Because when you see things revolve, they generally don't go anywhere. They just sort of spin. But we use this word to mean a complete upheaval, but also an upheaval with a view towards this certain kind of future. And I bring all this up because there's a sense in which nation and nationalism is caught in this emergence of all these different terms and ideas that are sort of propelling us towards this rapidly accelerating future that's urgent and that we want to seize by force somehow as part of modern life. And nationalism is a part of that. It's an identity that organizes the others and brings about this sense of urgency, this need for urgent action, and then Christian identity gets swept into that as something that serves as a sort of vehicle for expressing that urgent national impulse, a sense of bringing about a certain kind of growth. I won't go through all of these slides. This was in some sense going to serve as a backup in case you weren't as talkative as you are. So. I did put though here in this slide some things that I take to be, I would suggest at least, as some characteristics of Christian nationalism. I don't have a fixed definition of this. You'll find different definitions. I think at least one, and I know that not everyone can read this from where you're sitting, but I think one central characteristic is that there's a fusion of a national identity and Christian faith. So a fusion of nationalism and Christian identity, but one in which loyalty to the nation is seen as a necessary part of true Christian living and the necessary expression of it. My hunch is that the way that these two often come together is that religious identity or Christian identity is the kind of inward part, and the national identity is the outwardly expressed part. So that religion serves to kind of cultivate the right kind of national feelings in that sense, at least in the way it looks. This new identity, though, claims our highest loyalty. This fused Christian national identity in the context of Christian nationalism is the highest loyalty. All other loyalties are playing a subordinate role to that. They fill that out, but that joined nationalist and Christian loyalty is the highest thing. It's overlapping with, significantly, a certain kind of racial identity, it seems to me, even if that's not explicit. It seems to me that that's nearly always present. And importantly, it's really emotionally overdetermined. This is really professor speak, I think. But emotionally overdetermined, meaning that it's something that appeals to people on an emotional level. It's not something that people are rationally talked into. It's not something that people arrive at as a result of a particular type of argument or conversation. They see a meme and they feel that that's right, and they resonate with it. Or they see particular symbols, and those are felt really deeply. It's emotionally overdetermined. And then lastly, it entails, I think, a sort of call to action. So in the way in which this is sort of arising around the same time as we have new ideas of revolution, arising at the same time that we have this sense that history of the world is progressing towards something. There's a sense that nationalism is going to be at the center of that. It's going to be the tip of the spear, so to speak, in leading forth the world to this new reality. It seems to me that these are kind of ingredients of nationalism, which is to say that it's not just saying I'm a Christian and I have that identity and I love my country and I have this identity and put them together. It's something much more than that. It's something that takes over. It's something that becomes the thing that people are. In that sense, I think idolatry is a great word for this in the Christian context and from the standpoint of Christian theology. It takes the place of it, displaces all these other loyalties.
You know, it's something just occurred to me, and this is probably before you were born, but you know, when I was a kid, the big was the Russians versus US, communist versus, you know, democracy. And that may have contributed to this sense of, you know, Christian nationalism, because the Russians didn't allow their people to have a faith, go to church. We were better because we were Christians. We were better because we were democratic. And we need to kind of have a shift of focus now.
Yeah, that's right. So on one side, the US is being democratic against communist country or socialism. Also Christianity versus atheism.
Yeah.
That's right, those things all.
That was a whole, and I kind of forgot about that.
But I think with nationalism, Christian nationalism and also other forms of nationalism, there's not a lot of enthusiasm for liberal democracy, I think, as that comes out. That tends to slow the process down.
Liberal, what did you say?
Democracy.
Oh, okay.
And instead, a desire for stronger, bolder, and more aggressive forms of government. This comes into it.
Plus, Christ is so emotional for everybody. And, for example, you know, in Catholic religion, a lot of people martyr themselves. I mean, it's so emotional, and to combine that with a theology, I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah, that's right. So you have these loyalties that in different contexts could already claim one's highest loyalty, and they're coalescing into or fused into something larger and higher. I'm aware of the time and know that we're kind of at the end of the time.
You need 5. We got started a little late, so
Yeah.
we're 5.
Okay.
Nobody's trying to run away, so it's all good.
Fair enough. Yeah, so I think in the modern period we have a problem in a certain sense in Christianity that didn't exist in the same way prior to that. So the Holy Roman Empire, this is me slipping the compressor mode again. Does anyone know when the Holy Roman Empire ended? So the thing that was started by Charlemagne on Christmas Day in 800 and lasted for quite some time. Does anyone know when that stopped? It was 1806, August of 1806, when the last Holy Roman Emperor, his name was Francis II, abdicated in the face of Napoleon's armies. This is in the context.
I learned something.
Yeah, the Napoleonic Wars. Yeah, it's surprisingly late. In a sense, I don't know how many people noticed because it ceased to be as much of a feature. But in a way, a lot of the attention in Christian theology went towards that earlier dynamic. How does the authority of the emperor match up with the authority of the Pope in the Catholic context? Or how do the authority of pastors and ecclesiastical authority, how can this be related to political authority? But all this belongs to an earlier context where you would have these stated authorities, but they'd be in the context of a larger Christendom. In the modern context, we have this more splintered set of identities in terms of nationalism. And it's no longer the case of relating things to a particular emperor, to a particular prince, or just this abstract question of relating spiritual authority and political authority, but it has to go through this cipher, this lens of national identity, of language, of tradition, of race, of all these things. And the question of how to negotiate that and how to do that well, I think, is unresolved. We do have national identities, and we have racial identities, for better or for worse. National identities also for better or for worse, and these things change. There can be better and worse ways of describing those. But in some sense, Christian faith has to relate well to these things. And it seems to me that we haven't yet figured out how to express this. Christian nationalism then is a kind of symptom for what happens when we don't, and when this all kind of festers to the surface in a violent way. I think we'll leave things there with the last word that if you're interested in receiving any readings that you'd like to read kind of along with the class, there's nothing required, but if you'd like to kind of read things that will more or less match up with what we'll do for the next few weeks, you're welcome to do that. I'll send around a piece of paper, or you can set up a piece of paper to kind of collect email addresses, and I can provide those. Next week, we'll be talking about the particular kind of Christian nationalism that was arising in the context of National Socialism, Nazi Germany. And then in subsequent weeks, we'll talk about Christian identity movements in the Pacific Northwest, some of the more prominent forms of Christian nationalism today in the US, Russia, Hungary, other places. And generally, trying to figure out together how to respond.
Sorry,
please.
I don't know if you can even answer this, but have you heard like how big of a, this seems to be a movement, and I think it's growing, how big the demographic is now, or how, like, good question.
It is a good question. I think it's difficult to say because not everyone would claim this kind of label. But it seems to me that even where the language isn't used, it's present. It's kind of seeped into a lot of just the ways that churches operate. So I really do think that this community is unique in the area in that regard, which is great. In that hand, it's less great that the kind of rise of Christian nationalism and these things have done. Otherwise, it's wonderful to meet all of you in such a group setting. I look forward to conversations in the week ahead. Please feel free to stop and talk if you'd like to, but I'll see you next week. Otherwise.